I was cast out of my own home because of a lie. Everyone I loved turned against me, and for years I carried the weight of betrayal. But I didn't disappear. I came back under a new name, a new face, and slowly, I wove myself into their lives. They never knew it was me, until the day I forced them, publicly, to admit the truth they had buried. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about patience, justice, and what happens when the people who wronged you finally face the mirror. My family burned me out of my childhood home with lies, so I returned as a stranger and watched them unravel. They labeled me a thief and an outsider after a misread ledger and a gossiping neighbor. In one afternoon my childhood room was emptied, my name stained, and the house I loved parceled among the loudest mouths. I was exiled not by force but by consensus, whispered accusations that hardened into law. The injustice lodged in me like a splinter. I could have left, vanished with my dignity folded tight, but the idea of walking away while falsehood stood unchallenged felt worse than any solitude. So I planned to return, not as the reckless daughter they remembered, but as someone they would trust to tell the truth. I would not burst into their drawing rooms and demand apologies. I would become the quiet instrument of correction, a patient archivist of the facts they had overlooked. Patience became my craft. I adopted a new name, Anna Hale, quiet, ordinary, forgettable. I studied their habits, who chaired the charity evenings, which neighbor kept the attic light on, who loved public praise. I joined the same committees, volunteered at the same events, and sat in the same pews. I cultivated friendships with people who valued facts, a young reporter hungry for fairness, a retired judge who disliked sloppy narratives, a genealogist who lived for records. I did not forge evidence. Instead I coaxed forgotten facts into coherence. A county clerk remembered a signature. A historical ledger referenced repayments. Each small corroboration was a thread. I left documents in places they would find, an envelope on the church bench, a photocopy slipped into a book club folder, so that revelation felt inevitable, not dramatic. My actions were gentle manipulations of attention. I created situations where their memories would collide with paper. Anxiety replaced certainty, and that unease was progress. I practiced small civilities that made suspicion unlikely. Bringing baked bread to picnics, helping catalog books, listening more than speaking. These gestures opened doors and loosened tongues. Neighbors offered stray details, dates, lights left on, casual mentions of repayment, which I carefully logged. I never forced anyone to speak. I only created occasions where the truth could surface on its own. Each corroboration I collected was a quiet stitch in the fabric of a public narrative that would one day be visible to all. Dramatic pauses were my currency. I would place a photocopy of a ledger page where the right person would notice it and then step away, allowing them to handle the unease. I let them find breadcrumbs and fret over their absence, watch them question their memories. Each time anxiety crept into their features, I catalogued it in my mind like evidence of progress. I never raised my voice. I never threatened. My presence was a mirror that reflected their own inconsistencies. People who lie often give themselves away in the same small ways. A too fast laugh, a hand smoothing a napkin to create time, a shifting eye that seeks consensus. I learned to read those gestures and to record the ordinary facts around them. Names, dates, receipts, until the ordinary facts became a pattern that no rumor could survive. The town's centennial gala became my stage. They adored grand nights of portraits and speeches. I provided the perfect arrangement and the commemorative pamphlet. Quietly, I secured a scanned facsimile of the ledger that disproved the theft accusation and arranged for it to appear in the pamphlet's appendix under a sober caption. Repayment Record, W. Carlisle, 1999. I engineered the circulation of the pamphlet so that it landed in the hand of the most vocal accuser early in the evening. I watched his brow shift as he skimmed the facsimile. He flipped the pages with a tremor that betrayed panic. The reporter I had encouraged months earlier, the one who had been annoyed by sloppy narratives in her beat, rose and, after consulting the ledger in my pamphlet, asked measured questions that put the family on the defensive. The questions were simple. Can anyone corroborate these dates? Who remembers these repayments? Under the chandeliers, witnesses who had once been silent found their voices. A neighbor confessed with apology, that he had conflated two different conversations when he first accused me. A bank clerk, present as a guest, acknowledged that signatures had been mixed. Each admission was small, but together they formed a chorus. My sister tried to pivot to old grievances, hoping to muddy the water. Instead, the gathered documents forced clarity. The judge I had befriended oversaw the exchange with a surgeon's calm, dissecting claims with questions about accounts and dates. The moment of public correction was precise. Not a scream, not a spectacle, but a meticulous reassembly of documentary truth that left no comfortable lie to stand upon. The most exquisite part was not a dramatic unmasking but the hush that followed as the town absorbed the weight of papers that refused to bend. The room shifted, the illusion of consensus unpicked itself as peers parsed the primary documents aloud. My sister's laugh caught mid-phrase. My father's composed expression gave way to the small tremor of someone who had not quite expected to be accountable. Guests who had nodded in the past now read faces like pages, searching for an explanation that would absolve them of complicity. The retired judge I had trusted rose and, with calm authority, called for a formal review of the claim made against me years before. The reporter took notes with the steadiness of someone who had been waiting for a story of truth rather than scandal. Each admission, each adjustment of memory, was a tiny victory. The pamphlet did not shout. It simply delivered facts into a room full of stories, and facts have the habit of straightening lies when they stand in the same light. There was no theatrical unmasking, no violent spectacle. They offered apologies, some tentative, some raw, and the town recorded a correction. After the gala, the town paper printed a concise correction and a portrait of the ledger page. In the days that followed, some people sought to avoid me. Others came with gentle apologies. The family, shaken, offered small gestures, a returned photograph, a handwritten note, the types of rituals people use to stitch social fabric. I did not ask for rings returned or portraits burned. My victory was moral and public. My name was cleared in a way that mattered in a small gossiping place. Yet there was a touch of sorrow. Years could not be returned, and some faces, relieved, bore a humbled regret that felt almost like pity. I took no pleasure in humiliation. I took satisfaction in the precise remedy of truth. There was also an unexpected tenderness in watching a father, confronted with his own haste, speak a simple "I'm sorry" that felt heavier than any shout. For a moment I saw regret that was human, not theatrical. I left the gala not as a triumphant avenger but as someone who had nudged a community toward honesty. My victory was quiet. The aftertaste was complex. Justice mixed with loss. Would you have done the same? Would you return to gather truth piece by piece, or would you walk away and let the past lie? Is a public confession enough to mend private pain? They thought the gala would close the chapter, that my name had been cleared enough for the whispers to settle and the community to move on. But I knew better. Lies leave stains that don't wash out with a single apology, and my family's pride was too brittle to accept the truth without trying to twist it. In the weeks after, I could already hear the murmurs circling like tired birds, that the evidence had been too neat, that perhaps I hadn't stolen but had schemed in other ways, that Anna Hale's efficiency was suspicious. They couldn't admit the simple fact that they had been wrong, so they reached for shadows to justify their guilt. That was when I realized my revenge was only halfway done. Clearing my name was one thing. Taking back the power they had stolen from me was another. And I intended to take it piece by piece. I moved with care. I never pushed, never shouted. Instead, I let their own paranoia gnaw at them while I grew roots deeper into the community. I became indispensable in ways small and large. When the library needed volunteers, I was there cataloging late into the evening. When the church choir scrambled for funding, I quietly arranged a donor. When the mayor prepared his annual address, it was Anna he asked to polish his words. Each task seemed ordinary, even forgettable, but together they built a portrait of someone reliable, trustworthy, necessary. In a small town, reputation is currency, and soon mine was richer than my family's had ever been. The more useful I became, the more my family unraveled. My father, who once scolded me for being careless, now complimented Anna on her attention to detail, never recognizing the irony. My mother avoided me, unsettled by the vague familiarity she could not place. And my sister, oh, she was the sharp one. She hovered near me at every gathering, her eyes narrowing as if she could peel away the mask with suspicion alone. "Anna," she would say with a brittle smile, "where did you say your family was from again?" I answered with half-truths. A grandfather who loved ledgers, a childhood near orchards. Real enough to hold weight, bland enough to deflect. Each vague reply only stoked her frustration, and the more she pressed, the more others began to see her as paranoid. Her desperation painted her in colors of bitterness while I remained serene. It was the sweetest reversal. She was now the unstable voice in the room, and I was the calm one people trusted. But I wanted more than just appearances. I wanted them to feel the gnawing fear I had lived with, the uncertainty of being doubted, the hollow ache of not being believed. So I began planting seeds. Not lies, never lies, but truths timed with precision. A comment about discrepancies in a committee budget here. A reminder of old council records there. I mentioned facts to the right people at the right moments, then let their curiosity do the work. Soon the local reporter began sniffing around old donations. The genealogist uncovered letters that contradicted family boasts. My father's former business partner confided that some records had always bothered him. I didn't need to accuse anyone. I only had to place the breadcrumbs where others would trip over them. The result was slow, almost imperceptible at first. People who once looked at my family with deference now looked at them with quiet suspicion. Polite smiles remained, but conversations were shorter, glances sharper. My sister felt it most. She tried to claw her way back into favor, raising her voice in meetings, volunteering for leadership roles. But every attempt turned clumsy. She was too defensive, too quick to snap. Once, in a heated discussion about fundraising, she turned to me with venom disguised as charm. "Perhaps Anna should handle this since she seems to know everything." The room went silent, the air thick with disapproval. I only smiled gently, offering to help. Her anger backfired, and I could see her credibility bleeding out with every word. Then came the church audit, the perfect stage I hadn't even needed to design. My sister, desperate to prove her competence, volunteered to present the family's contributions. She didn't know that months earlier I had, accidentally, left a copy of an old bank statement with the audit committee. The statement showed that funds she had claimed as donations had in fact been redirected for personal expenses. It wasn't enough to put her in legal danger, but it was enough to stain her image. When the discrepancy surfaced, she sputtered, accused others of sabotage, even pointed a trembling finger at me. The room watched, stunned, as she flailed. And I sat quietly in the back, a picture of calm. No one believed her accusations. They believed the documents, the facts, the steady truth I had spent months assembling. The fallout was brutal. The woman who once orchestrated my exile now stood in the same position. Doubted, dismissed, her words dismissed as paranoia. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was more complex. There was satisfaction, yes, in seeing her taste the bitterness she had served me. But there was also sorrow. Part of me still wished she might look at me, truly look, and realize who I was, admit the cruelty she had inflicted, and apologize. Yet deep down I knew that was impossible. My sister would never yield that kind of grace. So I set aside the fantasy of reconciliation and focused on what was real. I was taking back the influence they had stolen, and they didn't even realize it. After the audit, people began turning to me with questions once directed at my family. "Anna, could you oversee the next event? Anna, what's your opinion on this matter?" My sister's name grew quieter in conversations, until it nearly vanished. My father, humiliated, retreated from public life entirely, claiming health concerns though everyone knew the truth. The weight of decision-making and reputation was shifting, and it was shifting toward me. One evening, as I walked home from yet another meeting where my opinion had been sought, I realized how far I'd come. The girl who had been shoved into exile with whispers of theft had become the woman everyone trusted. My family's collapse wasn't loud, it wasn't catastrophic. It was slow, steady, undeniable, the same way they had once dismantled me. Only now, I was the architect. And yet, I couldn't shake the question gnawing at me. Was this enough? To see them falter, to watch their power wither. Was that the end of my story? Or would true justice mean more? Would it mean pulling off the mask and making them face me, not Anna Hale, but the daughter they had betrayed? So I'll ask you, if you had the chance to replace those who wronged you, not with anger but with competence, would you take it? Would you let them crumble beneath the weight of their own mistakes while you stepped into their place? Or would you forgive and walk away, letting them live with their lies? By the time summer spread across the valley, the shift was complete. People no longer thought of my family as leaders. They thought of them as relics. Conversations that once centered on my sister's sharp tongue or my father's stiff authority now flowed toward Anna Hale, toward me. And though I wore the mask still, I began to sense that the endgame was drawing near. Revenge, after all, isn't only about toppling your enemies. It's about deciding when the curtain must finally fall. But I couldn't rush. If I revealed myself too soon, it would be rage and chaos. Shouted denials, desperate defenses, a public quarrel that left the truth muddied. No, what I wanted was something undeniable, something so clean that even those who had once condemned me would feel the ground shift under their feet. So I kept weaving, pulling threads tighter around my family's influence until the web was mine alone. The opportunity appeared when the mayor announced the town's centennial celebration. It was to be the grandest event in decades. Parades, speeches, historical exhibitions. Every influential figure wanted a role, and naturally, the organizing committee turned to me. At first, I hesitated. The responsibility was enormous. But then I saw the stage for what it was. A perfect crucible, a place where the entire town would gather, where history itself would be spoken aloud. If there was ever a moment to unmask them, to unmask myself, it would be there. I began preparing months in advance. I suggested an exhibition of town archives, including personal letters, financial ledgers, and old council notes. People thought it quaint, a nostalgic touch. But I knew it would serve another purpose. Among those documents were the very records that had once been twisted against me, now restored and verified. Quietly, I ensured they would be displayed, polished, undeniable, their seals gleaming under the exhibition lights. Meanwhile, I continued my subtle work with my family. My sister, desperate to claw her way back into relevance, volunteered for a small role in the planning committee. I agreed, smiling, and then assigned her to tasks that exposed her worst traits. She was in charge of coordinating vendors, and when she snapped at one merchant too harshly, word spread. She was to manage ticketing, and when the numbers came up short, suspicion fell on her, though it had only been clumsy math. I didn't sabotage her. I only put her in positions where her arrogance did the job for me. By the time the celebration approached, people rolled their eyes at her name. She had become exactly what she accused me of once being: unreliable, untrustworthy. My father, too, tried to reassert himself, appearing at meetings with the gravitas of a man who once commanded respect. But each time he spoke, his voice wavered. People remembered the discrepancies from the audit, the whispered questions about old accounts. He looked smaller now, frilier, as if stripped of the armor of certainty. My mother avoided public life altogether, content to cling to the shadows, whispering warnings my sister ignored. And me. I became the quiet center around which the celebration revolved. The musicians came to me with their needs, the artists asked my advice, the council deferred to my judgment. I was everywhere and nowhere, never grasping at glory but always present. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had exiled me to erase me, and in doing so, they had made me into someone indispensable. As the centennial week drew near, I felt the tension coil tighter. Nights became restless, my thoughts circling endlessly. Would I reveal myself publicly, with dramatic flair, or privately, letting only my family see the truth? The choice mattered, because it would shape not only my revenge but also the legacy of my name. In the end, I decided it had to be both. The town needed to see the truth, but my family needed to feel it, to look into my eyes and recognize the daughter they had condemned. The night before the celebration, I visited the exhibition hall under the guise of a final inspection. The glass cases glimmered in the dim light, filled with photographs, letters, and ledgers. I paused before the case that held the documents tied to my own story, the misinterpreted records that had been used as proof of my crime. There they lay, corrected and authenticated, bearing the signatures of officials who had finally admitted the truth. My reflection wavered on the glass as I stared at them, a ghost hovering over her own history. For a moment, doubt clawed at me. What if, after all of this, the town still found a way to excuse my family? What if they dismissed my reveal as melodrama? What if revenge, so carefully crafted, collapsed into another wound? I pressed my hand to the glass and breathed deeply. No. The truth was stronger now, stronger than their pride, stronger than their lies. And tomorrow, everyone would see it. When the celebration dawned, the streets bloomed with banners and flowers. Children in costumes paraded with drums, merchants filled the air with the smell of roasted sweets, and the whole town buzzed with excitement. I walked through it all with a steady calm, though inside my heart pounded. Every smile, every greeting of, "Good morning, Anna," was another reminder of the mask I wore. By the end of this day, that mask would shatter. The speeches began at midday. One by one, officials spoke of history, community, pride. The mayor praised resilience, the priest spoke of forgiveness, the headmaster of progress. And then, when the final speech was to be delivered, they called for me, Anna Hale, the woman who had held the centennial together. I stepped onto the stage, the sunlight sharp on my face, the murmur of hundreds gathered below. For a moment, the weight of it nearly broke me. But then I remembered the winter night when I had been thrown out of my own home, the icy wind in my hair, the disbelief in my heart. I remembered the years of silence, of building myself from the ashes. And I began to speak. I spoke of history, not just the town's, but personal history. I told them how communities can make mistakes, how they can believe lies and let those lies guide them. I spoke of exile, of loss, of patience. My voice carried steady, every word deliberate, every pause heavy. The crowd leaned in, drawn by the rhythm of revelation they did not yet fully understand. And then I told them that the girl they had condemned years ago had never truly left, that she had returned not as a stranger but as someone they had come to trust, someone they had praised. "That girl," I said, my eyes sweeping the crowd, "was me." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Gasps erupted, some muffled cries, some disbelieving laughs. I saw my sister's face twist in horror, my mother's hand rise to her mouth, my father's shoulders sag as if struck by a blow. But the crowd, they listened, they stared, they waited. And I gave them the truth, calmly, without malice. I pointed to the exhibition, to the documents displayed in glass, to the undeniable proof of my innocence. "You believed a lie," I said, "and you let it destroy someone who had given you nothing but loyalty. I came back, not to harm you, but to show you that truth, however delayed, cannot be erased." The silence was total, the kind that vibrates in the bones. And in that silence, I felt the balance shift. My family's power, their pride, their certainty, it cracked like porcelain. The crowd no longer looked at them with respect. They looked at me. And so the third act of my revenge closed. Not with fire, not with ruin, but with revelation. The girl they had abandoned stood before them as the woman they now trusted most. Their lies had been undone by patience, their arrogance dismantled by truth. But even as the applause began, even as people surged toward me with tears and apologies, I felt the weight of the final step still waiting. I had revealed myself. Now, I needed to make them face me, not as Anna, but as the daughter they had betrayed. The centennial celebration had passed, but the tension it revealed lingered like a ghost in the town streets. People no longer looked at my family with the unquestioning respect they once had. My sister's missteps during the festival had become the subject of whispered conversations, and my father's retreat into shadows only amplified the aura of defeat surrounding them. Yet this was still not enough. Victory through invisibility, through quiet manipulation, was satisfying, yes, but I craved something more. I needed the ultimate reckoning, a confrontation so public, so undeniable, that my family would be forced to face the daughter they had exiled, the truth they had ignored, and the consequences of their arrogance. The opportunity came in the form of the town's spring gala, an annual event that drew the entire community into one glittering hall. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, the scent of roasted meats and fresh flowers filled the air, and the crowd moved in the familiar rhythm of ritual and expectation. The committee asked me, Anna Hale, to oversee the program. It was perfect. I was trusted, indispensable, and utterly invisible in my control. This would be the stage, literally and figuratively, for the final act. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I orchestrated every detail with meticulous care. Every guest list, every speech, every exhibit was designed to build toward the moment I had been planning for years. I invited the very people who had condemned me, the banker who had verified false claims against me, the neighbor whose gossip had fanned the flames, and, of course, my family. Everyone arrived with the confidence of power, unaware that the walls themselves had been rigged to expose it. The exhibition portion of the gala appeared innocuous. Framed letters, ledger pages, and archival photographs lined the walls, presented as a tribute to the town's history. Yet beneath the polished veneer, every piece had been chosen with precision. Among them were documents proving the repayment of debts they had claimed I had stolen, council minutes that showed misattributed accusations, and letters corroborating my own innocence. Every record was authentic, verified, and impossible to dismiss. They were truths they had once ignored, now impossible to ignore. The night began smoothly. Speeches flowed, music filled the room, and laughter rippled across the crowd. My family walked in with measured grace, confident they had weathered enough storms to retain their dignity. My sister's eyes searched the room, suspicious, trying to locate threats, but she could not see me in the crowd of guests. My father's posture was tight, my mother's smile strained, but they clung to their composure, believing the exhibition to be harmless. When the moment for my final speech arrived, I stepped onto the stage. Calm, collected, measured, I allowed no hint of triumph to color my voice. I spoke first about community, about history, and about mistakes that had been made, mistakes that shaped lives and left wounds. I told a story, carefully framed, about a young woman exiled through misunderstanding and false accusation, a woman who had returned quietly, observing, building, and waiting. My words drew the attention of everyone present, but still, none recognized the tale as their own. Then came the revelation. I paused, letting the weight of silence press against the walls, and looked directly at my family. "That young woman," I said steady and clear, "was me." Gasps filled the hall. Some clutched their hands to their mouths. Others froze mid-step, staring as if they could unsee the truth. My sister's face twisted in disbelief, her carefully constructed mask shattering. My father's jaw went slack, and my mother's pearls gleamed in the harsh light as her hand trembled at her throat. The documents I had curated were no longer just records. They were mirrors, reflecting not just the truth of my innocence but the undeniable reality of their errors. I did not scream. I did not accuse. I simply let the proof speak for itself. I gestured toward the exhibition, letting the assembled letters, ledgers, and council minutes shine under the chandeliers. "These records," I said, "show the mistakes made, the assumptions taken for granted, the falsehoods accepted without question. You built walls of accusation and tore someone from their home. Now the truth stands before you, undeniable, verified, and public." The room held its breath. I watched my sister struggle to formulate a defense, only to falter with each passing second. She opened her mouth, then closed it, words lost to the weight of evidence and public scrutiny. My father's hand twitched at his lapel. He wanted to speak, to salvage pride, but the documents, the witnesses, the public eye rendered speech useless. My mother's voice faltered, a whisper lost amidst the murmurs of the crowd. One by one, the townspeople began to acknowledge the evidence. A former council member, present at the gala, cleared his throat and confirmed the authenticity of the ledger entries. A neighbor, whose casual gossip had once been treated as fact, admitted aloud that he had misremembered dates. Even the bank official who had verified false claims offered a solemn nod. The crowd shifted. The authority my family had once held dissolved under the weight of collective acknowledgement. Then, the final stroke. My sister's own voice, trembling, forced out an apology. I misjudged her. "I misjudged you," she said, eyes flicking toward me, searching for a reaction. My father followed, voice heavier, slower. "Mistakes were made. I am sorry." My mother whispered, almost inaudibly, "I did not see the truth. Forgive us." In that moment, the full arc of revenge was complete. It was not the cry of rage, the shattering of possessions, or the public humiliation that gave satisfaction. It was this, the quiet, precise orchestration of truth that forced them to confront their own errors, publicly, in front of the community, with no room to hide or rationalize. The gala ended in a mixture of applause and stunned silence. Some offered congratulations to Anna Hale, still unaware she was the daughter they had cast out. Others whispered in hushed tones, eyes following my family's retreat from the stage. I remained calm, serene, allowing the moment to exist fully without interference. I did not need to gloat. The victory had been earned, the balance restored, and the truth had been recognized. As I left the gala and stepped into the cool night, lanterns casting long shadows across the square, I felt the weight of years lift slightly from my shoulders. The family who had wronged me had faced the consequences of their pride, their lies, and their failures. I had forced them to confront the daughter they had cast aside, to acknowledge the truth they had ignored. And yet, a quiet question lingered in the air, heavier than satisfaction. Now that the truth was known, would they change, or would they carry their shame quietly, hidden beneath forced smiles? Would the town remember the lesson, or would gossip and assumption rise once again to take its place? And I leave you with this. If you had the chance to orchestrate justice so precisely, so silently, that those who betrayed you would confess in public, would you take it? Would you step into the light, reveal yourself, and let truth have its moment? Or would you remain unseen, letting your patience and cunning reshape the world quietly? The night of the gala had passed, but its echoes lingered in every corner of the town. My family was no longer the center of attention. They had been stripped of their aura of authority, leaving only whispers of shame and reluctant acknowledgement of their mistakes. My sister avoided eye contact with everyone, my father kept his head low, and my mother, ever composed, retreated into silence. Yet the truth remained. The daughter they had exiled was no longer invisible. I had regained my name, my dignity, and the subtle power they had once stolen. But the final act, the revelation that would forever mark the boundary between exile and return, had yet to unfold. The opportunity arrived with the Spring Festival, the town's grandest gathering. I had been entrusted to oversee the event, as usual. Streets were lined with stalls, the air heavy with the scent of roasted nuts and blooming flowers, children in colorful costumes paraded with drums, and the entire community buzzed with anticipation. To the crowd, I was Anna Hale, the indispensable organizer, calm and efficient. To my family, I was still the stranger they had grown to tolerate, unknowingly dependent on me. But tonight, that illusion would end. I arranged the program with painstaking precision. Exhibits of town history, speeches honoring tradition, and the unveiling of a community mural, all innocuous, all designed to set the stage for revelation. Among the exhibits were documents I had carefully curated over months. Letters, ledger entries, council minutes, all proving what my family had once denied. Every piece was authentic, every signature verified, every fact undeniable. They were truths they had tried to bury, now displayed in plain sight. As the festival reached its peak, the crowd gathered for the final segment, Stories of Belonging. Children and volunteers spoke briefly, and then I stepped onto the stage. My heart pounded, but my expression remained serene. I spoke of the importance of community, of truth, and of mistakes that have the power to harm those we love. I wove a story of a young woman exiled by misunderstanding and false accusation, a woman who had returned quietly, observing and patiently building herself anew. Every ear was attentive, every gaze fixed, but none yet knew the story was their own. Then I paused. The hall fell silent. I let the words settle before delivering the final blow. "That young woman," I said, voice steady, eyes sweeping the crowd, "was me." A wave of astonishment rippled through the festival. Gasps, whispered questions, and frozen expressions spread like wildfire. My sister's face contorted with shock and horror, my father's shoulders slumped as if the air itself had grown heavier, my mother's hand rose to her mouth in disbelief. The documents displayed in the exhibits became living evidence of what they had done, mirrors reflecting the consequences of their pride and cruelty. I did not shout, I did not accuse. I allowed the truth to speak for itself. "You believed lies and let them guide your actions," I said, gesturing toward the glass cases filled with letters, ledgers, and council records. "You tore someone from her home and cast her out, but here is the truth, undeniable and public." The crowd turned toward my family. Former council members confirmed the authenticity of the records. Neighbors admitted misremembered events. Even the banker who had signed false affidavits nodded solemnly. The room collectively acknowledged the facts, leaving my family trapped under the weight of their own history. One by one they spoke. My sister, trembling, forced the words out. I misjudged you. I misjudged her. I misjudged everything. My father followed, slower, heavier. Mistakes were made. I am sorry. My mother's whisper barely reached the front row. I did not see the truth. Forgive us. The confessions were sincere but reluctant, shaped by necessity rather than remorse, yet they carried the undeniable force of acknowledgement. The crowd erupted into a mixture of applause and stunned silence. Many approached to offer congratulations, unaware that Anna Hale was the very daughter they had once exiled. Others whispered, their eyes wide with disbelief at the public unraveling of a family's pride. I remained calm, serene, letting the moment breathe. There was no need for gloating. The victory was complete. Justice had been served not through rage, but through the patient, deliberate orchestration of truth. As the lanterns burned low and the festival wound down, I slipped away from the crowd and stood on a quiet hill overlooking the town. The streets glowed softly below, voices and laughter drifting on the breeze. I had reclaimed more than my name. I had reclaimed agency, recognition, and the balance of power. My family had faced the consequences of their actions, and the community had witnessed the truth. And yet, a quiet melancholy remained. Years lost to exile could not be returned. Relationships fractured, trust eroded, moments vanished forever. My triumph carried the weight of both satisfaction and sorrow, a reminder that revenge, even just revenge, is never entirely without cost. I took a deep breath, feeling the night air fill my lungs, and thought, this is what patience, planning, and unwavering resolve can achieve. They had tried to erase me, but instead, they had built the stage upon which I could reclaim myself. The world had been tilted back into balance, and I stood at its center, not as the girl they cast out, but as the woman they could no longer ignore. So I leave you with a question. If you had the chance to reclaim what was stolen from you, to orchestrate justice with precision and patience, would you do it? Would you reveal yourself at the perfect moment, letting truth speak louder than anger, or would you remain unseen, letting your silence hold power of its own? The choice, ultimately, defines the victor.